Hello everyone and welcome to Tips and Tricks, this episode about pedals, and specifically what I do that lets me change two pedals with one foot almost at the same time. But before I start that, let me tell you a little story. I remember when I first was getting this pedal harp, so that was almost 2 years after I started playing, and we'd ordered this harp, and I was still playing on my Celtic harp, and started working on the first half of the last movement of the Handel Harp Concerto, and there was a section right on the bottom of that first page where there's an A natural on the first beat, an A natural pedal change, followed by an E natural pedal change on the third beat. And I remember thinking, whoa, that's just so fast. How can you do that? That's so fast. And so when I would practice the piece, I'd practice and have to flip the levers, and I would also practice moving my foot from roughly where the A pedal would be to roughly where the E pedal would be as I was sitting there at my Celtic harp, just because I thought that was so fast, and I needed to practice that motion of moving my foot. And of course, once you start playing the pedal harp and you get used to moving the pedals, and something like that doesn't seem very fast to me now. There's a lot more difficult pedal stuff in some pieces. But I still remember that, and it's a good reminder for someone who is first starting to play the pedal harp that they're going to maybe feel that it's kind of intimidating. And it does get better as you learn more. So let me talk about this technique that I use. And let me aim this camera down so we can actually see the pedals. There they are. So I play with my foot resting off of the ground, so that it's resting on the pedals. Some people, I think, play with their heel down and their toe on the pedals. And obviously, if we're here in natural, my heel's maybe going to rest sometimes, but I'm also positioned like this. And what that enables me to do then is to use the heel as well as the toe. So, for example, maybe I need a E natural and then an A natural. No problem. Much more efficient than moving the toe from here to here. And there's a spot in the Layne legend, right in the second to last page, where you need to change both the B pedal and the D pedal almost simultaneously, just from one beat to the next. So here I can go using that heel and toe, or the sort of the base of the big toe, to change those pedals very quickly. And it's, again, as I said, it works if you're trying to do two different pedals over here as well. So I find that very efficient. Again, it's much easier than having to move one's toe over from both of these two positions. Now, one of the things that lets me do that is what I'm wearing. I practice in socks or bare feet if the weather's warm enough. So when I go to perform, I'm looking for something to wear that gives me as much as possible that same feel. And these shoes are Caprizio, I believe, Caprizio dance shoes, jazz shoes. I got them probably 10 to 15 years ago, and they're great because they're somewhat formed. They look like a real shoe, but they have a very thin, flexible sole. So that's great. It feels almost as if it's just a sock. It gives you a really good feel. Now, I do know that shortly after I got these, I think they stopped making this particular model because for dancers, the dancers wanted something even more flexible. So a typical jazz shoe now is very formless. It's just sort of a floppy leather top, so that it doesn't look as much like a shoe, which is great for dancers, but unfortunate for me and for harpists, where you're looking for something that does look like a shoe. But again, dance stores are certainly somewhere to look if you're looking for other options in terms of performance footwear, because they do have jazz shoes. They have tap shoes where maybe you can remove the heel, because there's often a big heel. And of course there are also organist shoes, because they wear special shoes, though apparently they need a firmer sole than we do in terms of moving the pedals, so those aren't always quite as ideal as something like this. But having a shoe as flexible as this allows me to use the heel. Obviously, if you're wearing high heels, you're never going to be able to use the heel to change the pedal, so that's something to take into consideration. This technique of using the heel and being able to change two pedals like this is something that I actually just discovered on my own, and I hadn't run across anybody else who did that until a couple years ago when I did a concert in Seattle, where organized by the president there, Mark Anderson, and he had studied with Pierre Jamet in Paris, in France, and he said when he studied, which of course would have been a while ago, all the harpists there did this. They used that technique of using both the heel and the toe. So that's interesting. I'd love to hear from you, European harpists. Does this still go on? Is this something that you do? Is this something that you've seen, or is this something that you've never seen before? So I'd love to hear from you. What else do I have to say about pedals? Well, when you're looking at transcribing a piece, Bach or anybody, and you're trying to figure out, this is an awkward section to pedal, one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that as well as the left foot being able to grab this E, which, you don't come across every day, but you definitely see that in some pieces, it can also grab that F. It's a little less secure, it's a little more awkward, but it is possible. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're, tackling a challenging section to pedal. Now for me, the reverse, the moving the right foot over to grab, say, this B, is much more difficult because I have the whole soundboard in the way. But it's possible that if your legs were quite a bit shorter, that maybe your knee wouldn't be blocked by the harp and you'd be able to grab that easily. For me, of course, this is where just using the heel works. But, just playing with these possibilities can sometimes solve a really awkward section that otherwise might be almost impossible to play. And the final thing that I have to offer about pedals is just a reminder that when you're looking at a recital program or a concerto, a concert piece or whatever, something fairly complicated, that if you're like me and you practice in your socks or your bare feet, it's always a good idea to spend that last week or whatever practicing with your performance footwear, because the shoe, even though it's really great and it's almost as flexible and is the same amount of feel as just your socks or bare feet, it's slightly different. And so that can throw you off, especially in some section with a bunch of pedals and the feel's just a little bit different, and suddenly, before you know it, you've lost everything and you're in some totally different key, and that's no good. So I would definitely recommend that you wear your performance footwear. In fact, where it's a good idea, for me, I'll usually wear a tux. And I know for my first couple of recitals, I would definitely practice or tails, I guess, in that, just to get used to the feel of that, because it's not something that I would practice in normally. So that's all I have to offer today. Hope you've enjoyed it, and see you again next week. Cheers.